Alright guys, how's it going? Lisa Su will take to the Computex stage on the 27th this month and deliver one of the most eye-opening keynotes in the history of the PC. I was told many months ago that she would deliver it at CES. However, some stuff got in the way of that. Stuff which I'll detail in this video. And to be frank, I'm becoming aware of a few issues around having this early access to information. One obvious example of that is the excitement of a new product launch isn't really there for me anymore. I mean, that seems crazy, as Zen 2 will likely be one of the most influential products in the history of computing. It will be so important due to the massive swing in fortunes that it causes for AMD and Intel, and the consumer, and the professional, and the data center, and nothing will ever be the same again. We're really quite lucky because this tech stuff that we've chosen as our hobby, as our work, and as our lives is truly world changing. What other industries can say that? Pharmaceuticals, medicine, maybe? Of course there will be others making the claim, and I don't mean to belittle other industries, but there's not a lot of world changers out there, and we're one of them. And sure, it's also about entertainment, and technology is the major driving force with that as well. And in a way, we're really close to the very top of this industry, at least in terms of information. But when you already know what's coming months in advance, it does take away the thrill of the surprise and some of the magic. And obviously, I'm passing that on to you guys too. And what's really interesting about all these leaks is I'm barely even giving you 10% of the information that I have. Before I talk about some of that other information, let me just first of all lay out some analysis for you. AMD started sampling Zen 2 in the third quarter of last year, so that was either July, August or September 2018. I'm not guessing at that. Lisa Su said it herself at AMD's third quarter financial call, and the wording was unambiguous. We began sampling our next generation Rome server chip broadly across our customer base in the third quarter. And also, the second generation of EPYC, our 7nm CPU, will ship in 2019. We are broadly sampling it now. So twice she used the word broadly. So this wasn't simply a case of only the very largest high performance computing and hyperscalers that got access. So anybody following this should have analysed that early Rome silicon was out there. It was likely going to be buggy, but good enough to run a benchmark while crashing frequently. And of course some stuff will likely not work at all. I detailed this whole early silicon process in my video An Epic Update, where I also told you about Zen 2's A0, A1 and A2 silicon still being buggy, and that B0 silicon would be coming soon. I launched that video in late October, however, I had the information earlier in the month, so it could have been October when this B0 silicon was actually ready. And from what I was told about the A2 silicon, I felt that B0 would likely end up good enough to launch, B1 at worst, unless there was another major revision required. I pointed that out in the same Epic Update video, in fact, when I also disclosed that the current silicon was nearly 80% faster than the equivalent Naples CPU. Much of the performance was there already, even with this broken A silicon. And then, on the 13th of November, HLRS leaked details of AMD's Zen 2 based Rome CPU, including core counts and clock speeds at 2.35 GHz. And this was coming next with their Hawk supercomputer. This really ought to have been enough for anyone to analyse that the Zen 2 core chiplet was basically done. Yet months later we'd read so-called experts saying that there was no way AMD would know clock speeds so far from launch, even though HLRS seemed to know exactly what they'd be getting to 50 MHz granularity back in the middle of November. And of course, in late November, I had the mother and father of all Ryzen 3000 leaks dropped on me. And that was just before another similar leak appeared on Reddit. When I looked at both, I thought, those numbers are really good, but nothing I couldn't have speculated on. In fact, I did speculate heavily that we may see some pretty insane numbers in my Evolving Master Plan video, where I pointed out the benefits of the chiplet architecture and what it means not only for better yield, but better performance as well through extremely aggressive binning. And before I launched that Ryzen 3000 leak video, I also received word from a previous source, the same source who had given me all that information on the A silicon, that the fastest Rome chip would have higher clock speeds than the fastest Naples chip. Double the cores, higher clock speed. I then had enough information to feel extremely confident in the leak, so I ran with it. I think it's fair to say though that very few had the same level of confidence as I did. One viewer whom over the following months it became crystal clear is privy to more information than most people in the industry, contacted me with the following information. I honestly don't know if you're right in terms of pricing, launch dates, clock speeds, etc. But I know that AMD will have 12 and 16 core AM4 models coming in 2019. So this was just after my leak video and near instant confirmation of 12 and 16 core models. And this news source also provided me with this X570 chipset diagram. Consider this an exclusive I could have given you 6 months ago. And they also sent me some information to go along with it. Apparently the motherboard guys weren't very happy about the cost of the chipset, which was around about $50 because it needed retimers to boost the signal between the CPU and chipset, and also between the PCIe Gen 4 slots. The email finished with, "I hope that what you've put out there is true, but I'm not going to bet money on your information." So that was somebody who clearly knows an awful lot, but wasn't willing to bet on my leaked information being true. I responded quickly and I got a follow-up email the same day with some more information. Zen 2 is set for a paper launch at Computex, but your source might very well be correct that they'll reveal some information at CES as well. AMD hasn't decided on the exact launch schedule and might hold back the 16 core parts, but the 12 cores are guaranteed to launch at Computex. Now this was back in December, remember, and as you already know, plans can change. And CES happened, and as I said at the top of the video, the information we got wasn't quite what we expected to see. On that same day, my source got back to me with some more information suggesting that X570 motherboards may be later than planned, possibly as late as July, and around about that same time, the main Ryzen 3000 leaker, the same one that gave me all the information about CES, got back to me with information that X570 was still a bit rough around the edges. Steve over at Gamers Nexus also talked a bit about how the chipset was holding up the Ryzen launch, and I noted that in a follow-up video, but sadly not everybody pays the same attention. Regardless of that, the emails on X570 continued coming thick and fast. The exact chipset configuration is still up in the air, which is a bit odd this late in development. And also, perhaps tellingly, the motherboard makers aren't that happy with how AMD works with them, mostly because they've gotten lazy working with Intel. Where have we heard these problems with AMD and the motherboard guys before? But this email ended with, "Regards to CPU samples in the wild, the board makers have early samples that are only good enough for debugging. Everyone is still waiting for the next revision of chips, which should be closer to the final hardware." And that last one was pretty interesting. We knew that AMD was sampling Rome months earlier, and we saw a demo at CES. There's no way AMD would demonstrate something that wasn't stable. And we know that B0 silicon should have been ready around November at the latest. And Lisa said, on the same day as her CES keynote, in an interview with PC World, "There's a little bit more tuning to be done. We want to get the clocks in the right place." Tuning means small changes, not massive changes. And yet the motherboard guys still only had debugging parts in January. This information appears to have been validated recently by Komachi over at Twitter, who discovered the existence of A0 and B0 silicon Ryzen 3000 in a recent ASUS BIOS. The first evidence found of A0 was the 6th of December 2018, while B0 was first of all dated as late as the 22nd of March. But then another string was found in the BIOS and that date was revised down to the 14th of January, which was just a little after CES. So that lines up pretty well with the info from my source, and if you put it all together, we can build a story of the Zen 2 core chiplets silicon. A0 silicon was likely almost entirely broken, and it probably came back from the fab in the second quarter of 2018. A1 and A2 fixes took a couple of months each, and those fixed it enough to get it working, but it was still buggy and extremely liable to crash. Those are the samples which Lisa Su told us were sampling. B0 came in around November and fixed everything. However, there was no need to give anything to the motherboard guys yet, as the whole X570 thing was a complete shit show. So they got A0 silicon, which was barely enough to debug the motherboards. A couple of months later, they started getting lower quality B0 chips with locked multipliers, and we started to see leaks coming in around about that time in January from guys like Apisac. So for me, Matisse, while it could launch with B1 silicon, it would surprise me if it isn't B0. The thing here is though, I'm of course talking about the Zen 2 core chiplet, the same tiny 7nm chiplet used in servers and the desktop. But don't forget that the entire CPU is not the same, with both having different I/O dies. Still, it's unlikely that a 14nm I/O die is a reason for any hold up. AMD could have had those chips ready years ago in fact. And in fact, perhaps that's one reason why there's still 14nm instead of 12nm. Maybe not, but still, it's something worth thinking about. Anyway, the information just kept on coming. BizGram of Singapore leaked a list of Ryzen 3000 SKUs, which matched my info almost completely, before they then hurriedly removed it a day later. The information was just a little bit too close to mine for me to take it completely seriously, however. But my chipset leaker got back to me the next day to say that the pricing posted by BizGram is close to what the motherboard guys have been told to expect. They also told me that while there was still no confirmation of 16 core parts for launch, the motherboard guys have had engineering samples for some time. However, they were nowhere near the kind of clock speeds that my leak suggested. The next email I got had info on AGESA 0072, a week before any general information was available. There was also information that Zen 2 qualification samples would be coming soon, but retail availability was only expected after Computex. So to wrap up this part, about a month ago, I was told that the chipset was running pretty hot with M.2 RAID. Buildzoid talked a bit about that in a recent video without saying exactly what the issue was, but that's what it is. A couple of weeks later, we started seeing motherboards with fans and or ludicrous heatsinks over the chipset. So I've just given you a whole bunch of information I don't believe I told you about until now. And hopefully it is crystal clear that this source is extremely accurate. So you may wonder why I didn't give you this information before. Well, I figured that time was on my side. So at the very beginning of this month, the 2nd of May, Apisac dropped a tweet on us simply saying Zen 2 16 core. Now if you listen to or read most of the tech press, you'd be amazed at this, as they were all heavily doubting such a part would even exist on AM4, let alone that it would do 5GHz. Of course, the announcement of a 16-core Zen 2 chip didn't surprise any of us. I had got information from my source the same day as this, but I was asked not to talk about it yet, so I didn't. However, a few days later, and Apisac still hadn't given us any details on this 16-core chip, so I had to try and hurry him up a bit, telling him that the chips are now out in the wild. I was hoping that Apisac would release some information so that I could talk about it, citing him as the source. And finally, on the 9th of May, he gave up his secrets. Zen 2 engineering sample 16 core, base clock 3.3 GHz, boost clock 4.2 GHz, motherboard X570. And this CPU name can't be decoded by the decoder chart. Now this chip was almost exactly what I expected to see, as my source had also given me extremely similar information on this 16-core chip, although the base clock was just a little bit lower. I did get quite a bit more than that though, and I'll finish this video by giving you just a little bit to keep you going until Computex. I don't want to spoil AMD's big announcement. I've been doing it for the past 18 months, and like I said, it does take away some of the surprise. But on the other hand, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it anyway. My main Ryzen 3000 leaker got back to me a few days ago with what they believed to be the final Ryzen 3000 lineup, although in actual fact, they didn't give me any branding, which makes me wonder if AMD are going to go with something different. The most interesting thing about the new list was, it appears that there could be a quad-core after all, just the one though. That could point to yields maybe not being awesome, or more likely, it's down to AMD segmentation. Regarding the rest of the info, I was now given base clocks and all-core boost clocks, which are higher than I expected to see. Base clocks look to be around about 100-200 MHz faster for the lower end chips, and around about 100 MHz lower at the higher end. That's the kind of tuning Lisa was talking about back in January. But I'm not going to spoil it completely by giving you the whole list. And I also know that many of you simply do not trust the original source, believing that I am simply being strung along. So chances are you won't be happy with this information anyway. That is unfortunate, but I guess it's understandable after what happened at CES. However, I have always maintained that I believed this source and that I believed their information was correct. But I understand if you don't trust that. So I guess I'll just have to pass on the last bit of information I got from my chipset source. The same one who has given me most of the information in this video. There was the usual information again on X570 being a hassle in some fashion, and a lot of this does appear to be related to heat. This PCIe Gen 4 is allowing NVMe drives to stretch their legs, and we will see this as another win for AMD in the SSD benchmarks. However, it's come at a power cost, especially in RAID, hence the heat sinks and fans. However, there was also some more, slightly more important information when they told me AMD handed out more samples this week. There is a 16-core part with 4.3 GHz boost and 3.2 GHz base clock. So as you see, that was very similar to Apisac's information. But then, the one thing that I cared about, the only thing I had been waiting on all this time. There is also a 12-core part, which boosts to 5 GHz. Now remember, this source at first didn't believe my leak when they first came to me back in December, and that's why I told you that, so that you know that this source in particular isn't some wishful thinking fanboy. This is a person with actual information. Throughout these past 6 months, I've been given the rundown of engineering samples in the hands of the motherboard guys, and at no time were they ever anywhere near the leaked clock speeds. Until now. And as far as I'm concerned, if there's a 12-core part boosting to 5 GHz, there's a 16-core part boosting to at least 5 GHz. And I was given memory speeds as well. And I know all the dates that matter too, including the embargo lifting, review dates, etc. But I'm not going to give you any of those. Just be a little bit more patient. You've already waited this long. I will, however, leave you with the first ever independent benchmark of Ryzen 3000, assuming that's the final branding, at least. And I've got a screenshot right in front of me. And sure, it could have been faked, but I really doubt it. 16 cores running at 4.2 GHz Cinebench R15, scoring 4,278 points. And as Apisac said, it did have a different code string that couldn't be decoded as usual. Based on this score and clock speeds, the 8-core chip shown at CES was almost certainly running between 4 and 4.2 GHz. I would be inclined to round that down closer to 4 GHz now though. That's the all-core boost, which is what Cinebench runs at. And if we just go by Ryzen 2000, 4 GHz all-core boost at 65 watts should come in around 4.5 to 4.6 GHz all-core boost at 95 watts. Interestingly, versus the 2700X, IPC looks to have increased by around about 12.5% in Cinebench R15, but nearly 4,300 Cinebench points at 4.2 GHz. And the fastest 16-core chip is going to run a lot faster than 4.2 GHz. And 5,000 points from an actual desktop CPU could be within touching distance. And let me just take this chance to say a big thank you to all of my sources for taking the risks by giving me the information they do. I'll catch you later, guys.